Greetings, I am Herbert Erpaderp, and today I'm going to build this 144th scale F14-a Tomcat by Revell. I don't normally build jets because, well, around World War II is the time period I'm most interested in, but I was given this as a gift, and I figured, why not do something that I wouldn't normally do? The back of the box doesn't really tell us anything about the kit, just other stuff that Revell offers. Oh well. The artwork on the front is pretty cool, though it doesn't really give a whole lot of information either. I mean, somebody looking for very specific details and things like that probably isn't going to be buying this kit anyway, so I suppose this is fine. Inside the box we find sprues! 5 in total, 4 grey and 1 clear. At a quick glance they all seem to be pretty decent. I kind of half expected there to be a lot more flash. I mean, this is a cheap kit and I would imagine a fairly old tool, but it looks pretty decent if you ask me. And the clear part is pretty nice. I'm not an expert on jets or even a novice, I suppose. They're just not something I'm super interested in beyond the whole "wow, that thing's shiny, loud and fast" fascination I'm sure most of you can relate to. Which is more words than necessary to say I couldn't tell you how accurate any of the detail on this kit is. That said, I can tell you that the parts aren't too badly moulded and look pretty neat. There is going to be some cleanup required, but it's not going to be a whole lot, and you'll be ready to glue bits together in short order. After looking at these parts, I feel like these things are going to go together pretty well. The weird gear things on the wings initially struck me as odd. That turned out to be one of my favourite parts of this model, but more about that later. Decals are included in this kit. The markings seem to be only for one plane, VF84 of the Jolly Rogers, and this is depicted on the front of the box, so I guess that makes sense. I've no idea of the quality of these decals, but I'm sure they're fine. There is also an instruction leaflet, which was a bit bigger than I would have liked, but I suppose that's okay too. I would also prefer it if the pages were stapled and folded down the side, but instead it folds over the top, making it kind of cumbersome to use. There are also 3 painting guides. I'm unsure if there are suitable decals for these schemes, but it's nice that they show you there are choices in how this can be painted. Nothing on the last page, which is not especially interesting, is it? Anyway, let's get to building this. We start at the beginning, which, in this case, is the cockpit. Please insert very mature giggling here. I install this forward controlly board thing. It's important to use the technical terms. This is a bit fiddly, but not too hard to get into place. Then comes the control stick. This probably has a cooler name, but I'm calling it the control stick. I suppose that's what it is and what it does, so why not? Tweezers were helpful here. I don't think I could get this in with my fat fingers. There's also a control panel for the rear seat, and this is about as easy to install as the forward one. I think it looks decent enough, though obviously it isn't hyper detailed or anything like that. But it does the job. We're going to need something for the pilot and, I guess, shooty man to sit on, so a pair of seats are installed next. Nothing especially challenging in getting these into place, though you might need to give them a bit of a nudge to get them into the right spot. The cockpit can then be installed. Again, very witty and mature cockpit-related jokes go here. I glue it into the right side of the front pointy part of the fuselage. Seems to fit well enough, but the only way to be sure is to glue the other half of the fuselage front part on. I added glue at the front first so that I could focus on one joint at a time. It did end up going together quite nicely. Next, this platey thing is installed on the bottom of that assembly I just put together. The fit here isn't totally perfect, and I think it might have been worth fiddling with just a little bit more, but hindsight is 20/20, and I'm sure this will be fine and dandy anyway. Moving on, it's time to assemble the main body of the plane. This involves installing the wings, and you can see how these geary things are supposed to mesh. I was originally thinking I would glue them into place, but leaving them movable so that I can flap them back and forth was just way too entertaining. I glue the upper and lower parts together in sections so I could apply pressure more easily, and I'm obviously trying to make sure there isn't any glue on the movable parts of the wings. I then glue the front assembly into place. There's a couple of wedge-shaped bits on the rear part, and matching recesses on the cockpit part. This goes together well enough, though it doesn't quite look perfect, but it's good enough for me. It seems like there should be lines there anyway, it's just a bit rough. Following that, I glue the cowlings for the front of the engines on. These go into place pretty easily and they look fairly neat. Obviously there's one for either side. Nice and symmetrical. I then turn my attention to the rear of the plane. I install this whatever it is. There is a guide tab on this, and if you look carefully you can see that it should only go on one way, unless you want the parts to be misaligned. You probably don't really want that. I follow that with the cable hook for carrier landing. A little bit of nudging so it's lined up nicely and it's in. Simple. Then toward the front of the plane I install this, well, I don't know what this is either, but it does go into place pretty easily. Next come the vertical stabilizers. These aren't exactly difficult to install, though I did and ah a little bit about their positioning. I wasn't totally sure if they should have a slight outward lean to them, or be completely vertical. I went with the slight outward lean because it just looked better to me. Also, it looked to me that the bases of these were identical. Not that I know what it should look like, but it does look a bit odd to have detail on the outside of one stabilizer, but on the inside of the other. That said, I'm not really worried about it. So I move on and install the nozzles. I'm sure these aren't super realistic, and a lot of people are into replacing the nozzles with aftermarket parts, but, and as much as I appreciate the gift, I'm not so sure that it's worth going to that extent for a kit like this. At any rate, the nozzles are easy enough to install. And here's my favourite feature of the kit. I'm sure none of you are surprised, especially since I mentioned it earlier. At this point you need to make a decision. Do you want to build this kit with the gear up or down? I've chosen down, but if I were to do this again, I would probably model them up. I install the forward landing gear, and I'm pretty glad that this is a single piece. That makes it less fiddly to install. It is still a little bit fiddly to make sure the strut is installed nice and straight, but I think I got it there close enough. The instructions say to attach the wheels to the gear before installing it, but I figured it would be a better idea to add them later. I figured it would save knocking them off the strut. Then it's time to deal with the landing gear doors. I found this kind of annoying. There is one closed doors part, and no open doors parts. You have to cut up the closed door part to make those. This strikes me as odd, but it is what it is, so I cut the parts. And definitely not perfectly. I used tweezers and a fair bit of time fiddling around with the bits to get them installed. You are actually meant to cut this door into 5 pieces, but I figured it would be a bit annoying fiddling with the tiniest bit, so instead I just bent the part. The last step is to glue the long thin part onto the gear itself. So it's a bit messy, but I guess it looks the part, or close enough for me anyway. I think I just heard a rivet counter explode in the distance. Oh well. I then added the wheels. I suspect this was actually just about as fiddly as it would have been to add these before the gear struts went into place. I got them on though, and they do look fairly straight. Of course, the nose gear alone isn't enough. We need more. So I install the rear landing struts, and these go into place quite easily. A bit of nudging to make sure they look nice and straight, and they're on. I've also left the wheels off until later here, like with the nose gear. The doors for the rear landing gear are also single pieces that need to be cut up if you want to model them open. This time, only 3 pieces. It is still kind of annoying and fiddly to install though. It took a bunch of nudging and probably more than enough complaining, and I doubt the parts are in anything approaching a perfect fit, but they're on, and that's enough for me. Whoever thought this method of doing landing gear doors was a good idea should have been told no. Moving on, I then attach the wheels, which is a quite simple affair, though the fit isn't super tight, so a little bit of fiddling is in order to be sure they're on nice and straight. And then it's time for flappy wings again. Actually, it's now time for weapons. I don't remember what any of these weapons are called, and that's bound to upset some obsessive nerd. What matters is looking at the instructions and gluing the right missile to the right mount. This small one goes on here, like so. Onto that assembly goes another mount, which owing to the keying is not too hard to get lined up nice and neat. That mount is for this bigger rockety explodey boy. There is a piece of keying here, though it doesn't really lock the weapon into place so much as give you the correct position lengthwise, so it still required some nudging and fiddling to get it to look right. I think my result is decent enough. I then joined the two halves of the drop tanks. I'm pretty sure that's what these are anyway. They go together okay, but they will need a bit of additional cleanup. While I let that bond, I assemble another missile and mounting combo. This is pretty straightforward, and required a bit less fiddling than the previous sets of missiles, and they can be glued along the bottom of the fuselage like so. The fit was not great, so I had to apply a bit of pressure to get the parts to bond in the right position and minimise gaps. Eventually they're on and I move on to the drop tanks, which go on the underside of the engine cowlings. A bit of nudging was of course needed, and the guide pins were very small and difficult to locate, though doing this in front of a camera probably doesn't really help. Eventually they went into place, and they look very drop tanky. The first weapons that we assembled can then be installed just outboard of the landing gear. Again, it's a bit fiddly and the result isn't perfect, but the weapons are there, and they do kind of help to hide the landing gear doors as well, which is nice. The final step is to add the clear canopy part. I haven't glued this into place yet because I would obviously like to paint the inside of the cockpit. A little bit of wing flapping because that's important, and the Revell F14-a Tomcat in 144th scale is complete. I enjoyed building this kit a lot more than I thought I would, and the finished result is better than I was expecting. I'm not a big jet guy, so like I probably said earlier, I can't tell you if this is a good replication of an F-14 or not, but the thing does look pretty cool, and if that's all you're after, there's nothing wrong with that. I know at least one person has recently expressed interest in seeing me build a Revell kit of some sort, so for that person or people, here you go, I did it. Let's just pretend it was intentional and not just a well-timed gift. I was able to get this kit built in one stream, which tells me that it's a fairly quick build, and I suspect if you're not otherwise distracted, you could probably put this thing together in an hour or so. I think it would make for a nice casual afternoon project, and I would also say that it's quite suitable for younger and beginner modelers. It's not an especially complex kit, and I would imagine that it's pretty cheap, so if you do happen to mess things up, it won't be a huge loss or anything. Not being a big plane guy, it probably won't be surprising for me to say that this isn't really a high priority on my list of things to paint, so there's not likely to be a painting video about this anytime soon. Though now that I think about it, my nephew probably would get a kick out of seeing this painted, so it might actually get done soonish. Who knows? Now I'm going to get comments from people saying, "You said you would paint the F14-a soon! Where is it?" Anyway, this kit is a bit better than I thought it would be, and now I'm kind of tempted to pick up some more cheaper Revell kits just because. If anybody has any suggestions for what's good, I'm interested to hear it. Obviously I'm not going to rush out and buy everything suggested because, well, my stash is already overflowing, but suggestions are always nice. Speaking of suggestions, I would suggest that you come and watch my streams. As I mentioned earlier, I built this kit on stream, and most of the models you see on my channel are built live on stream nowadays. There's a link in the description below, so give me a follow and come say hi next time I'm live. Also, if you want to, let me know what you think of this kit in the comments section below. And if you've not done so already, why not subscribe, follow, ring the bell, become a patron or YouTube member, or just come say hi on Discord or Twitch. Links to all of my things are in the description below. And, as always, I shall return soon, so until then, be excellent to each other, and thanks for watching. Farewell.